This is Viticulture, where we share conversations with makers, growers, thinkers, and doers, folks who cultivate a good life. My name is Chris Missick, and I'm a lawyer turned winemaker in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and I'm sitting down with great people in wine and other walks of life to hear their stories, learn their lessons, and take their advice on the perfect pairing. In this episode, we go beyond wine and vineyards to explore food and culture and family. Today, we're speaking with Paul Guglielmo, a staple of the radio industry in Rochester, New York, and an entrepreneur that relied on his Italian grandfather's recipes to craft world-class pasta sauces. He's well on his way to carrying a closely guarded family recipe to great heights, and in the process, honoring his family heritage and recognizing the importance of community. If you like this content, please help us grow by liking this video on YouTube and subscribing to our show on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com, subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. And now, here's the show. If you've been in the Rochester area, you've definitely heard the name Paul Guglielmo. He's worked with Brother Weeze, and if you've been in Wegmans, you've seen his name as well. He's an entrepreneur who, as he says, blew up his career, something I can sympathize with when I left my prior career as a lawyer, to make wine in the Finger Lakes. So thank you so much for joining me this morning, Paul. It's a real pleasure to talk with you. I feel like our lives have these parallels that I'm excited to explore. So welcome.
I can't wait to get to we both blew up careers that we put years of blood, sweat, and tears into, and then we eventually just went, something else, I guess.
Exactly.
I love it. I can't wait to pick your brain on it because I still don't know what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Well, and it happens, when we start off on these paths, like they are the dreams we're pursuing for our life. Like so many things led up to the point where we said, okay, this is going to be what I'm going to pursue, whether that was radio or law. And you put work and sleepless nights, blood, sweat, and tears into it. And you realize at some point you come to your life and you're like, I'm not doing what I love anymore.
Right. So that's that was where I felt I felt that I had reached, when it came to radio, I felt like I had seen the top of the mountain, right? Like I felt like I got where I wanted to get in radio, and I was looking around and I was going, so this is it, huh? It feels like this is good, but the other thing, meaning the entrepreneurial effort here that we're going to talk about, that's giving me I guess, for lack of a better term, it's giving me a higher high these days than, hosting a radio show was giving me. And that was maybe when I knew. It was like, that's where my heart is being pulled. And also, it wasn't just about the heart, Chris. I don't know about you, but also, the dollars and cents started to make a little more sense. Radio was not... It's hard because I don't necessarily want to sit here and just say negative things about radio. I certainly have many positive things to say about radio, and I've got a few negative things to say about radio, but it's not a business that you look at right now and say, now there's a business for the future, right? And so there was also
terrestrial radio.
Yeah. It's almost like, and it's funny because I have a lot of employees now here at my plant who are young. They're in their 20s, and when I talk about the radio to them, it sounds like the way my grandmother used to talk to me about her programs from the 1950s. They're like, what do you mean? You mean a radio? They're like, a radio? You were on the radio? They don't even comprehend that you can have a radio that you turn on and tune in into something. Yeah. It's funny.
It is. But there's a lot of us, and I'm only 40. So I'm not in my 60s or 70s, but the radio always fascinated me, whether it was long car drives and Prairie Home Companion, or quite frankly, the nerd in me falling asleep to Art Bell and Coast to Coast. Like, I just loved that stuff. I still do. You know, the industry has changed so much from consolidation, social pressures, podcasts. It's really taken a bite out of that. I know, you know, we've seen that happen with some pretty legendary radio personalities here in Rochester who, just because of the nuts and bolts and finances of the radio industry, haven't had their jobs anymore. Were you feeling that kind of pressure at all in terms of, man, I am talented at what I do. People love me, but am I going to get squeezed out of this industry?
Well, first, you know, we can dive into self-esteem if you want to, because never the people love me thing never felt that way. But absolutely did I think that there was at least a 50% chance that this is just going to end in me getting called into an office one day and being laid off.
Yeah.
You know, I always knew, and to be honest with you, in fairness, I knew that for a very long time. That wasn't recent, because some people have said to me, they've said, you read the writing on the wall recently. And I went, no, I read the writing on the wall for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I used to tell my mother, because my mother didn't love that I worked in radio, because I went to college and she thought I should be a professional, and to her radio, and I was wearing a t-shirt to work. And, you know, to her, she's thinking, this doesn't seem like something you go to college to do, to go wear a t-shirt and talk about the daily topic. Just didn't compute to her. And I used to tell her, I used to say, don't worry, I'm going to get fired one day. It's just a matter of if it's in 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, or 2 decades.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's happening, but that's how it ends for like 90% of radio people, is, you know, fired or laid off, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yeah, the writing was definitely on the wall. And I always operated knowing there's a chance that I'm in this thing for 30 more years, and there's a chance that I am laid off on a day that I don't even see it coming, and it could be tomorrow.
And the tough part is, I mean, you're sitting there, you've got hours to fill on the air. You build up a sense of intimacy if you're in one of those shows where there's co-hosts, and you never know when something you say is not going to be palatable to someone on the outside, where they don't know your heart or your intentions. You're just maybe trying to say something funny. Then next thing you know, you've got that management meeting. So that there has to be a little bit of fear, and that has to dictate what happens when you're in the studio. But
yeah. And the other thing about that, Chris, was over the last few years with a growing business, was also being a business owner, and then being on the radio, and then being on the radio show I was on, which I have so much love for Brother Weeze and the Brother Weeze show. But let's be honest, it's rated R. Right. And so, and a lot of times I was looked at to put in that funny line. And I am a guy who does find some humor in the went too far line, right? The line that just was like, oh my God, you can't say no. And I found that funny. Look, I grew up listening to that kind of radio, and then I was in that kind of radio. And it occurred to me more and more as A, our culture changed, and B, I became more successful in business. I'm going, look, like this stuff, you know, these jokes, some of these jokes that I've told, they're not going to be palatable for everybody, and that's fine. That's fine. The same way my sauce is not palatable for everybody. You know, it's
pretty good.
It's fine, but I did start to think about that, Chris. That's a really good point. I've never really thought about that before. The idea of, what if I say the thing today that's going to get me canceled, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you probably don't remember this, but I believe we've met, and actually we met in Brother Weeze's studio.
Yeah,
so years
I
ago,
thought so. Yeah.
Years ago, shortly after we were really growing our wine business, one of my salespeople, Tara, her sister worked in the studio, and we were invited in, and we were tasting wine. And
I remember this. Yeah.
It was great because we were talking about wines. Everybody seemed to love what we were pouring. But I remember as soon as you guys went to commercial, and it was like 10:30 in the morning, the tequila was already out. But then again, you were up at probably 2:30 in the morning, so this was the end of the workday for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I was up at 2:15 a.m. for 10 straight years. By the way, that's my USDA inspector going by in the background right now.
Welcome.
But no, I woke up at 2:15 a.m. for about 10 years.
Wow.
2:15 a.m. But and that sucked, and I was always tired, and it was just a life of being. That's the other thing is people don't realize the actual physical toll that takes on you. That is not normal. It is not normal to be up at that hour, and I was physically tired all the time. Okay, and that sucked for family life. But then on top of that, the positive though, the other thing is what you're pointing out, and that is that by noon the world is at lunch and I'm at happy hour, man. I mean, I'm ready to roll. And and for the first few years of my career, Chris, in radio, I took advantage of that. I went out to lunch. I wasn't afraid to have a couple drinks at lunch. I went home, I watched TV, and I played video games. And then it kind of occurred to me, oh boy, I got a lot of time here that I'm wasting doing nothing. And that was some of the impotence for starting the business, was realizing like, geez, I'm spending a lot of hours playing video games throughout the week.
Well, and I know you have kids now, and that had to be really tough. I imagine some of that overlapped. I mean, you didn't purchase the business you own now until last year?
Yeah.
I mean, managing. I have a 4-year-old and an 8-month-old, and I just couldn't imagine how sleep deprived you were, considering those work hours.
It's something that I don't know if when the story of my life is completely over, whether I live another 40 years or 4 minutes, I don't know if I will be happy and it's a good thing or if it's a bad thing. However, Chris, I am pretty operable off of limited sleep. I have no problems getting up in the morning. I woke up this morning at 5 and I shoot out of bed like that,
That's great.
And that's something that I consider to be a gift that radio maybe did give me, because of the fact that 5 a.m., I mean, after 10 years of 2:15 a.m., 5 a.m. feels great to me. And I hope that never goes away, and it gives me an advantage. I do think waking up that early gives me an advantage. Now, granted, I get tired at night, but here's the thing. I don't get tired till 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm being tired at 6 p.m. the way I used to be. 9 or 10 o'clock is a healthy bedtime, I think. I don't think that's ridiculously early. So
Not at all.
No.
So a little bit about your background, Paul. You aren't from Rochester originally. And if I recall correctly, when you first came to Rochester, you had illusions that maybe it was like New York City, some big city radio gig that you were getting.
No, not that it was like New York City, Chris. I thought it was New York City. I thought Rochester was in the list with Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, Rochester, Staten Island. Like the first time I heard that I was moving to Rochester, I thought the thing that you guys hate, and that is that it's New York City.
Yep.
Up there somewhere is Buffalo. I remember learning that the capital is Albany, so that's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But really, it's just New York City. That's what I knew of New York State when I heard the word Rochester for the first time.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You've come to embrace the city, though, and you've explored some really fascinating businesses and folks. Do you still love Rochester?
I love Rochester. I came here thinking I'd be here for a year. This is considered a quote unquote medium-sized market. So when I came here, it was for radio, thinking I'd do my year or two here. And that's a trajectory a lot of media personalities will take until you do what they call marry a market, which is when you just pick one and stay, which is what I ended up doing. But basically, I came here thinking my original plan was 1 to 2 years. I was going to spend 1 year just kind of busting my butt and trying to, do the best I could. And then the second year I would spend trying to find my next job in a major market. And I knew within 6 to 9 months that Rochester could be the market I was going to marry. And at the 1 year mark, I said, let me wait 6 months before I start applying for jobs. I'm really liking Rochester. And then at the 18-month mark, I went, let me wait another 6 months. And eventually that just became, I think I'm in Rochester now, for good. Yeah.
And you've really put down roots, especially with Permac. So let's explore how that happened. A lot of people who look at entrepreneurs say, I would love to be there. I don't know the first step to take, because you took literally your grandfather's recipe and turned it into a flourishing business.
Yeah. It sounds good when you talk about it. It sounds, I'll tell you the truth, man. I do sometimes think about where we are, and I'll walk through this plant and I'll look at things.
Yeah.
And I remember we got that and when we bought that, and when we bought that, and these employees, and they know what to do. And sometimes I go, holy cow. Sometimes it manifests itself in pride, which is what we're talking about now. Sometimes it manifests itself, quite frankly, in imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. That does happen to me sometimes, which is another thing that I learned happens to entrepreneurs, right? Yeah, it does. Is sometimes that imposter syndrome. But the pride, when it manifests itself in pride, I can't explain it. I don't know. What I will say is it is not something that happens like that. You don't just do it all at once. You have to take that first step. And what you just said, the first step was, believe it or not, getting a job. Before I started a business, I got a job because I didn't have any money, because that was, we skipped over that part when you talk about radio, is you're either one of the 5% of people who make a ton of money in radio, or you're one of the 95% people who are severely underpaid in radio. Yeah. And I was of the 95%. So I didn't have any money. I didn't have the money to start a business. So the very first step I took was I got a job. I started bartending on Friday nights, and I was the world's worst bartender. They put me with a real bartender, and if you ordered anything other than beer or wine, I would go get the other bartender and say, you have a customer over there. They need something called a martini. I don't know what that is. I'm going to go over here and pour beers. So I was bad. Anyway, I worked at that job for a year. That was in Webster. I drove down 250 to where I lived in Fairport in my father-in-law's basement at the time, and I put whatever tip money I had into the Bank of America ATM and built up a $7,000 account over the course of a year, and I started the business with that. So the first step was just, I need a little money. That was it. Mm-hmm.
A couple other things that struck me about that, and then I really want to get into kind of some of your family background and some of your Italian heritage. When you purchased this business, you had been building a brand, so you had found a co-packer who was making your recipe. You were designing the labels, you were pounding the pavement, going to festivals. But when you finally were able to purchase this business, everything came down right as COVID was starting. Yeah. I mean, I think about that. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, you're right. Like, there's pride, there's imposter syndrome. There's also the fear that all of these folks, their paycheck depends on whether or not I can run this business well.
God, tell me about it.
I mean, the pressure that you feel there. You were trying to keep some of the employees. I think some of them even came on as investors with you. Mm-hmm. I mean, the weight of what that March a year ago must have put on your shoulders. Do you care to share any of that?
Yeah, the timing was weird. It was the first conversation I ever had, and just to kind of back up a little bit. So yeah, I had 6 years in of building this brand of Gugliamos, of this pasta sauce line where I worked with co-packers. Then I made the decision that I was 100% positive I wanted to leave radio, and that was a big decision. And when I made that decision, it was, okay, Paul, you want to leave radio? What do you want to do next? And I'm looking at my brand, and I'm going, geez, one of my options would be to try to just run with this brand and see if I can grow it. And quite frankly, that requires more money than I had. To try to grow your brand nationally, or even regionally for that matter, is a 6 to 7 figure thing. Yep. And I had some money, but I didn't quite have that money to take a risk with. So in January of 2020, so it's before we really knew the pandemic was going to hit us. Because remember, now we look back, coronavirus was here at that point, but we didn't know we were going to have this happen yet in January. I made up an excuse to come out to the co-pack facility in Bergen called Permac, where I had had my sauce made years ago. I had since moved on to a slightly larger co-packer, but I still had some specialty runs done in Bergen. Yeah. And I made up an excuse because the previous owner of this business used to get here at like 4:30 in the morning. And like I said, man, 4:30 in the morning to some people sounds crazy. To me, I'm like, great. He used to get here at 4:30, and he didn't have anyone here till about 5:30. So I made up an excuse that I needed to be there at 4:30 that morning to pick something up, whatever. Yeah. And so I knew I was going to get him alone. And then I just asked him what his plan was. And there had been some maybe some signs prior to that just little nuances, just sort of like, Paulie, my back hurts, I don't know what I'm going to do, and so I'm just wondering, like, is he dropping hints on purpose or does he say this to everybody? So I asked him what his plan was. He immediately picked up on what I was asking him. And basically he said, I would hear an offer on this business. And I drove away very excited. But the thing I remember about that also was I was very excited, but I was very conscious of not getting overly excited because I knew that, depending on the price tag, it might be unrealistic. And so I was very lucky that the gentleman I bought the business from had a realistic price tag. I mean, when you opened up the books and you took a look at what was on the books, what the asset list looked like, it was the right price tag. I mean, he wasn't trying to gouge me, and it was fair. So I got very, very, very excited at that point. Yeah. But you're still talking about February, so it's still pre-pandemic. And then a really weird thing happened, and that is the pandemic hit. And food manufacturing actually did this. It started to go up, right? It became in demand. And I started to become fearful for a brief period of time that he was actually going to say, hey, my business is worth more than it used to be worth now because demand has skyrocketed. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. He was a man of principle. And he said, we agreed on a price, and that's the price. And so that was it. So the pandemic hit in the middle of this deal. The deal started before and ended after the pandemic. Really, really weird timing, though. Yeah.
It was. And I remember going into our grocery stores and everything just being wiped off the shelves. Cans of store brand pasta sauce. You were limited to a single can purchase. Did that impact your raw materials? Were you able to get the supplies?
Well, big time. And
it was still, actually.
Yeah, still to this day, there are raw materials that are harder to find or at your, some stuff you can get, some stuff you just can't get, and then other stuff you can get, but the lead times are very long and they require some very, manufacturing is, you have to have like 7 or 8 things in line in order to do a job. You have to set up a job and do a job. And any one of those 7 or 8 things falls through, and all of a sudden you can't do that job anymore. And so planning that far ahead can be difficult. We're only planning solid clod schedules 2 to 3 weeks ahead in this business because we have to keep some versatility. The pandemic, the early on moments of the pandemic and the increase in demand, on the one hand, and it's really interesting we're talking about this, Chris, because literally yesterday I had the opportunity, and this interview was made public as well, but I got to talk to Stephanie Ledestri about this, who is like the LeBron James of sauce co-packing in Rochester, New York.
Yep.
So I was really encouraged to see that she felt the same way I felt. And really what it was is there was this demand and there was this call from the people who are buying your product, your distributors. I mean, I had a call from my single largest client saying, what do you have in inventory? My answer was a couple thousand cases. His response was, I'll take it all. Now, on the one hand, you're thinking, wow, that's amazing. On the other hand, think about having literally zero wine, Chris. Think about having literally zero inventory. All of a sudden, you're going, oh, my God. Oh, my God. That's great, but also like, oh my God, I just went from having inventory to having literally zero. So I was like that. One phone call, I was immediately depleted, down to nothing. Okay? So there's that, and that's good. And then the bad is, then that happens, but then at the same time, you're saying, great, it's in demand, people want it, it's through the roof. I go to the grocery store and it can't be kept on the shelf. You feel the business side of you feels an opportunity, right, to keep that shelf stock. The personal side of you feels an obligation to keep that shelf stocked, because people at that point were panicking. They wanted pantry items. They needed shelf-stable things. And then you're calling the people you call to make your product, your glass distributor, your cap distributor, your ingredient distributors, and you're saying, I need my materials. And they're going, oh, yeah, sorry, we don't have any of that right now. And you're going, no! The nightmare. Yeah. It'd be like if the world said, Chris, we need you to make all the world's wine tomorrow. Also, you don't have any grapes.
Exactly. Well, I've run into this myself. We launched a canned wine line, called Can Do, and done really well with it. So there's a twofold problem with that, though. When the canned wine is largely being consumed on premise and at events, and there is none of that going on, you're stuck with this huge inventory. But as we come out of that, now I can't find cans. I mean, getting access to enough of the raw material. And oh, by the way, if you want them, the price is now almost double what it was. So
Oh,
there's
God,
going to
tell me
be,
about it.
major impacts to those of us who are trying to plan our businesses moving forward. This is going to be an interesting quandary to work through with regards to the raw materials we need to grow grapes. And, it's interesting just thinking about how this is going to shake out in the future. It goes back to what we were saying. You can sell all of your product, but then if you can't get those raw materials that are necessary, how are you going to keep your people working? So
Mm-hmm.
it's I'll tell you, I think that the sauce is fantastic, though, and I had
Nice.
known that you were going to be launching the kind of your own larger venture, because I heard the day that you were going to leave the radio. I think Bob Lonsberry had you on. I was driving into the winery and you were talking about it. He didn't seem that sure that it was a good idea, but he's in that 5%, I think, of radio personalities, and you saw where this could go. I do have
Well,
some with me
yeah.
right here. I'll just throw it up and we'll have some video, but the picture on there, I think, tells a good part of the story. So the picture is you as a kid, and your grandfather, Pete. I love it. He's a man after my own heart, wearing flannel. Uh, my wife asked me what my favorite color is, and I always say plaid. But can you share that story? Because one of the things I like to focus on this show is what makes a good life. How do we live our best version of ourselves? We all have natural abilities and talents. Oftentimes we wish we had more. So the show's not just about viticulture and growing grapes. It's about growing a life and anchoring that in place and family and memories. So if you could just share a little bit about where this came from, how you learned to make sauce, and a little bit about your grandfather.
It was a weekly escape. It was Sunday mornings at my grandfather's house. He was up early. He had the sauce on right away. And no matter what time I got there, it seemed he already had the sauce on the stove. Later in life, when I wanted to learn how to make it, I tried to get there as early as I could so I could see him. And I finally got there early enough, and it almost felt like he was trying to beat me. Like if I was coming at 6, he was going to get the sauce on at 5:30.
Yeah.
It was just, I loved it. I loved going to my grandpa's on Sundays. We used to eat around 12:30. There was times in my teenage and college years where, waking up on Sunday at noon was tough because, Saturday night I may not have been in bed till 4 a.m.
Yeah.
and I was waking up not feeling good, if you know what I'm saying. A little too much canned wine maybe. And there was some time like that, but there was way more time where I wanted to get there as early as I could because there was just this thing I loved about it. There was this sitting around the table. There was solving the world's problems, right? There was everyone knows, my family and my grandfather, and it was just everyone who knows what are the problems going on in the world, and here's how I would fix them. It's like every old Italian guy thinks he knows everything. And then it all ended, and then all the cousins would come over, and it all ended in this giant meal. And I just found a thrill in that, and I found a thrill in the fact that as often as possible, a lot of those ingredients were coming right out of his backyard.
Yeah.
He was literally going out to the garden and picking a handful of basil and throwing it directly into a kettle. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And I still can't put my finger on what it is about that specific thing that I still find cool. But to this day, Chris, if I'm making sauce on a Sunday and I go out to my garden in September and grab a handful of basil and throw it into that kettle, I get this pang of adrenaline that I just think is I just feel like that is awesome.
Yep.
Everything about it. It gave me all the feels, right? I just loved it. And when I moved to Rochester, I missed it dearly. I had a tremendous amount of homesickness for that Sunday morning thing. And that was what it was. That's exactly how the actual sauce business started, was me in my little apartment on East Avenue on Sundays, making sauce by myself because it made me feel like I was at home. And every other weekend I would drive home. And every other weekend I would stay in Rochester. I didn't have any friends at that time. I'm up to 2 friends now. One is married into being my friend. The other one I literally created. So that's like, Anyway, that's really how it started, was me then on Sundays here in Rochester making that sauce. And then one of the things I fell in love with Rochester was support for entrepreneurship, artists doing things. I loved the Rochester Public Market. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. My parents would visit, and I would bring them down to that market. My grandfather visited a couple times. I would bring him down to that market, and there were people down there selling bottled jelly and jam, and I just, that was really the first little light bulbs for me, was like, wow, this is the type of city where I could can that sauce, bring that down here. People might pay me for that sauce. You never know.
Yep. I think that what you speak of, in terms of going into the garden, excuse me, and grabbing some herbs or tomatoes you're growing, I feel it too. And actually, I really got into making wine because I was into gardening. And there's something primal about it. It grounds us to where we are. You are recognizing the work that you put into the soil to grow that. It's something, even if you're not thinking about it, that 100 generations before you have done. And so I think subconsciously it ties us to the human experience. Is a lot of the produce then sourced from Rochester, or the best degree possible, or?
To the best degree possible. It depends. I mean, we're making, at this point, we're making a couple hundred items because we make more than just my stuff.
Yep.
So you're talking about some things that don't grow around here ever.
Yeah.
So there are some cases where no, it's just impossible. I mean, we buy from local distributors.
Yep.
But to the best extent we can get local stuff, yes, but it's not as good as it could be, not as good as it should be, or as I wish it would be, as far as buying produce locally. But I will say, when it's available, I always gobble it up.
Yep.
I think it's cool.
It is hard in these kind of more northern climates. So this episode will air a little bit later on, but here we are in mid to late April, and there's snow on the ground today.
Yeah.
Before I came into the studio, I ran downstairs to the basement where I had all the seeds that I've started, and I had almost put my tomatoes in the ground 2 weeks ago when we had this beautiful run of 70, almost 80-degree weather, and I was just so thankful I didn't. But I'm getting worried, Paul, because I see some of those blossoms starting to form on those tomatoes, so we've got to be able to act quick.
I always wait until the meteorologist give that. They will do it too. They'll do it like early to mid-May. They'll give you the all clear to plant your tomatoes.
Yep.
I always wait for that Stacy Penskin tweet that says plant your tomatoes.
So I'm from California originally, and I used to start my seeds in January. They'd be outdoors. I'd have tomatoes by March, April, and they'd go all the way until I remember the very last day of picking a tomato. Kind of my longest season was Thanksgiving. So
oh my God, that is dream come true. That's amazing.
So
that's great.
Yeah. So that is. But there is something about the community here, and there's something also for me. Just sort of talking about wine a little bit. There is almost something more fulfilling knowing the challenges we face and overcoming those. Now, aside from your grandfather's Italian heritage, you spent your 11th grade year in Italy, correct?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I know how it is when you travel when you're younger. You look back and you say, man, I wish I would have actually spent time studying this or watching that. But how formative was that? Because there's something very different about the lifestyle of folks in Europe, Italy, France. My wife is from France, and I met her there. Did that kind of build on this family experience that was important to you? Did it help slow your day down, because it moves at a different pace at times?
Yeah, my grandpa was a big part of the reason I went to Italy. Not that he specifically encouraged going to Italy, but he was a big part of it in the sense that he was so proud of his Italian culture.
Yeah.
That I wanted a piece of that. I wanted to see, like, he's so proud of this Italian heritage. I want to immerse myself in it fully and really be able to understand it.
Yeah. And
so that was a big part of the original reason. I just wanted to immerse myself in that culture. Now, actually physically being there was amazing because I had a couple realizations while I was there. First of all, it has to this day been the single most informative year of my life because being forced to go into and embrace other cultures. I'm living with host families.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing different family dynamics. I'm understanding how people live their lives. It was so great because it gave me an open-mindedness that I've never lost to different people live their lives in different ways, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. One thing I will say is that one thing that it kind of made me, so first of all, some things that people find surprising is, I remember being there and having tomato sauce and having pasta sauce and thinking to myself, this is good.
Yeah.
I actually prefer my grandpa's, And so people just assume the pasta, the sauce, the pizza, it's all got to be better. And then everyone goes on vacation for a week to Italy and they come back and they go, it's so much better. Oh my God, the food is so much better.
Yeah.
Well, okay, yes, if you go to cities and you eat at 5-star restaurants, the food's amazing, of course, the way it would be in every 5-star restaurant in America as well.
Yeah.
But I was living with families and I was having meat and potatoes for dinner.
Yeah.
And I was having leftovers from yesterday for dinner. And so I was gaining a perspective that these people are just people living their lives, caring for their families, making a living, working, and living for the weekend, and watching soccer the way we watch football. And it gave me this acceptance because, obviously in our country, and well, in the whole world, there's prejudice that exists, there's racism that exists. And it just gave me this complete wash of any of that because I'm just going, people are just people.
Yeah.
And for the most part, we are all doing the same thing every day. We're waking up, we're taking care of our families, we're going to work, we're eating lunch and dinner, it let me see that. And I loved it for that. I just loved that it gave me that. Being there for a full year let me do it as not a tourist, but I truly lived there.
Yep.
I truly lived there. It was such a great experience. I didn't get a wife, though, like you did. I messed up there.
Well, you would have been pretty young. I was older than you were. So.
That's true. Did you find that? How long were you there?
So actually, the very first time I was there was about 3 months. When I was in law school, I had a professor, and he was like your classic stodgy old professor, though he wasn't that old. He was just strict. And he said, the rest of your life is going to be miserable. He said about a third of you might fail out of law school. It's California, so only half of you might pass the bar. And if or when you're actually a lawyer, you're going to slog it out for 30 to 35 more years. You've got one chance to make one good decision, and that's to attend the summer abroad program I run in Toulouse, France. And so I thought, he's a wise man. I'll give it a try. And I kind of buffered that summer school with some extra time because I loved wine and I'd be in France. Why not? So I met my wife in the last 10 days at an Irish pub, and she was practicing her English and I was enjoying a pint of Guinness. And I realized, I called my mom that night. I said, this is the woman I'm going to marry. And so, we spent time, and I ended up doing that summer abroad program again the next year. And so been back and forth. I mean, cumulatively, months and months and months, probably close to a year, never more than 3 months at a time. But, there's someone else I interviewed who is a biographer of a famous philosopher. And this philosopher was known for saying travel narrows the mind. Not that we shouldn't travel, but sort of like what you described, Paul, people will go to a place for a week, it'll be a whirlwind, they'll come back and they think they know a place. And in that sense, it can narrow the mind because if culture, a very simple understanding of it is the way we do things around here, you don't really get that sense. You need to spend time, and you almost need that sort of laconic period with a family, whether it's sharing some prosciutto or watching Eurovision,
Yeah.
So
I mean, really, just watching TV. like what about a Tuesday when there's literally just nothing to do?
Yeah.
In a small town in Italy, right? Like people go for a week and they go to Rome, and every night is Saturday night, and they're drinking every night and eating every night and touristing. Okay, what if you had to wake up and go to school tomorrow?
Yeah.
I mean, you get the opportunity to see what it's actually like to live life in Italy,
Yep.
and it was good. I mean, don't get me wrong; I'm not saying it was bad,
Yeah.
but it was very normal. It was very normal. People were just living normal lives. Teenagers were running around trying to figure out how to get their hands on alcohol the exact same way we were back at my high school, you know?
Yep. A little easier, though. I think if the drinking age was 16, you can probably.
It was, let me tell you, Chris, here's in the town I lived in Italy in 1999. This is the year I was there. There was technically no drinking age. It was the discretion of the person selling. So all you had to do was convincingly tell them that you were buying this because your mother said she needed this.
Yeah.
Your mother sent you to buy this limoncello, and you need 4 bottles of it. And for the most part, they would just go, okay.
Yeah.
And they would sell it to you.
Well, and they also probably knew that drinking 4 bottles of limoncello is a punishment in and of itself. So,
Right.
When you got into deciding this was going to be a serious venture, you tapped a resource in the Finger Lakes that has been invaluable for the wine industry and food production in general. I'd love to hear your experience with Cornell.
Oh my God, Cornell's been awesome. Cornell to this day is awesome. Cornell, for anyone who doesn't know, Cornell has a food science department. They've got they call it the Food Venture Center, and it's actually based in Geneva. And it's a department of food scientists who work as what we call a process authority. And what process authority means is, to kind of put this in plain language, you have a recipe for pasta sauce. And the number one thing that anyone cares about is that you're producing it safely. Nobody cares from a governmental standpoint or a Cornell standpoint. They don't care if it tastes good. They don't care what your marketing is. They only care, are you putting a safe product on the store shelves? So in order to do that, you need to find a process authority. And a process authority will issue you something called a scheduled process. And a scheduled process, simply put, is a very strict and detailed recipe. That's all it really is. And it will have something called critical factors on it. And the critical factors will tell you, if you follow these 2, 3, 4 steps, and you log that, you keep paper records of these steps every time you make your sauce, you are producing safe product. And so for me, it's, did you cook your sauce to 195? Did you hold it at 195 for 6 minutes? Did you test the pH, the acidity? And when you tested the acidity, was it under 4.2? And did you tilt or invert your jars for 2 minutes to be sure to pasteurize the bottom of the lids? Those are my 4 things. Yep. They sign off on a scheduled process and send it to me. And they tell me, keep records that you're doing those 4 things every batch, and we give you our stamp of approval. Now, that sounds simple and straightforward, but where Cornell comes into play is, it is simple and straightforward for pasta sauce. But now let's say you're making chimichurri. Let's say you're making chicken wing dip. Let's say you're making vegan probiotic powder. Let's say you're making, I don't know these things. I'm not too familiar with these products, so I don't know how to jar them safely. That's where Cornell comes in. I can get somebody to come to me to say, hey, can you bottle this? We'll run with the example of chimichurri. Can you bottle this chimichurri? And I'll say, sure. And then I'll call Cornell. And I'll talk to one of them and I'll say, I've got a client asking me to bottle chimichurri. Can I do this? And how do I do this safely? And that's a resource they provide. And you pay for it, but you don't pay as much as you would think you pay. It's not thousands and thousands of dollars. It's usually under $100 per recipe. To get their stamp of approval on a recipe, which is extremely fair. Extremely fair.
It's interesting because when you first start talking about making pasta sauce, the percent of hydrogen ions or the pH or all of these chemistry related issues probably weren't even in your mind.
No, in fact, speaking of being an exchange student, I missed 11th grade. 11th grade at my high school was when chemistry was mandatory. I went to Italy for 11th grade. That counted as all my 11th grade credits. Okay. So I never took chemistry in my life. I'm one of the few people who graduated high school without their mandatory chemistry credit because I had one of the very few things that can override needing that chemistry credit, and that was I had been an exchange
Wow.
student. So I'd never took chemistry in my life, and suddenly I'm doing chemistry.
Yeah.
But that's where, back to your point, that's where Cornell comes in. When I don't understand, I can call Cornell, and they will tell me. I mean, those are scientists
Yep.
who, and by the way, here's the thing about them. They love their jobs. That's what's cool, right? There is one particular scientist at Cornell named Shannon who I work with all the time, Shannon Prezeller. And she and I recently had a phone conversation about local agriculture, and the passion that she has for local agriculture is so impressive. And I find that with all of them.
Yep.
They are so passionate about this region that they just want to encourage it as much as they can. And when you go to them saying, I want to bottle this new product here in the Finger Lakes region, they love that. They love it.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
So I did sit through chemistry in high school, but I might as well not have. I ended up taking chemistry at Finger Lakes Community College when I realized I needed to straighten some of these things out in my own head. So we share that. I was kind of still talking about the sauce. And incidentally, Paul, what we're planning on doing is we've done a lot of changes at our winery. One of the things we're going to be doing is launching some flatbreads. We're going to be using your sauce. So
oh my
folks who
God,
come,
that's so nice.
Order that. You'll be able to make it yourself at home and get your hands on some of this great stuff.
Hey, Chris, can I just mention something real quick? Did you see the inspector go by?
Yep.
Okay. That is a health inspector who just took a smoke break. I just want to point that out.
The world is filled with irony.
Yes. And by the way, I just want it to be known, I literally, I have a great relationship with him because when in our business, you get an inspector and you get them for a few months.
Yep.
So you do build rapport and you build a relationship. And that wasn't, I feel bad because people are going to be like, what a jerk Paulie is. But I've said that to his face before, and he knows that.
Yeah.
He's like, I know, I'm the worst.
So when you talk about wine, and because there is alcohol, a lot of the food safety issues are taken care of when you're over 8% alcohol. Doesn't mean we're not incredibly clean and focused. In fact, I steam my tanks, so it's not just sanitized or sterilized.
Awesome.
But we work with Department of Ag and Markets. They do inspections. And it's always funny because I'm also very cautious about fruit flies. It's one of kind of my pet peeves. But it is funny. Sure. They always like to come during harvest, and there's always a fruit fly. You're working with wine grapes. Yeah. And they're like, I got some fruit flies around. I know. Everyone in the world who's making wine is dealing with this. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. The Ags and Markets, ironic you would bring them up. They were here yesterday. I had my random drop in yesterday.
Okay.
And I've actually found them, to be honest with you, I've found them for the most part to be great to work with.
Yeah.
They're
good people.
You're right. I mean, you're a winery, you're going to have fruit flies, right? We're going to have some sauce splatter on the side of a kettle.
Yeah.
Right? These are not things that are perfect.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, you don't have fruit flies. In a perfect world, we don't have some splatter on the side of our kettle. And these guys are not going to kill me over my splatter on the side of the kettle. They're going to shine their flashlight and they're going to say, just try to get that cleaned up when you get a chance.
Yep.
And I've always found that to be very fair.
Yeah. Well, and they get to check the box to prove they were there, and
yeah.
And I've heard some horror stories from those inspectors of what they have to endure. So,
dude, I mean, I think here's the thing, right? I think when they walk into a facility where they see you as the owner are going the extra step to sterilize your tanks, they see us, a lot of things we do. We're working on are you familiar with SQF certification? It's a manufacturing certification that's sort of an extra level.
Okay.
It's sort of like you're voluntarily taking this extra level.
Yep.
So our paperwork is on steroids, right? We record everything that happens here, far more than we're required to. So typically when they see that, they're going to forgive a little splatter on the side of the kettle because they're like, obviously this place is doing a pretty good job. And I'm sure that's how they feel with you too. But then you hear some stories. They walk into stuff where I've been told stories about they walk in and they're live butchering an animal or something in the back of a restaurant. And it's you don't have any license to do that here.
Yeah. It becomes almost like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm or something, One of the things that stands out when you're looking at the shelf with your product is the artwork. Is there a story behind that? Friend, family?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little hardcore marketing. So About 4 or 5 months before we launched, we were scrambling. We needed a brand.
Yeah.
I originally didn't want to call it Gugliamo's because I just knew that I was naming it after my grandpa.
Yeah.
That to this day it says Gugliamo's, and that's because his name. My name happens to be Guglielmo, but his name is on it. That's how I think of it. Everyone thinks of it as Paulie's name is on there, but I think of it as my grandpa's name is on there. So I wanted Guglielmo, but I was getting nervous about that because I knew most people would think, look at this guy putting his own name on this thing. Like, who does he think he is? So I went to East Ave Wegmans, and I stood in that aisle, and I was like any Italian you've ever met. Never bought a jar of sauce in my life. Why would I? I make my own. So I was really unfamiliar with just how many options there were. It was very intimidating. My wife was with me. We kind of, my initial reaction was, well, I give up. We can't stand out in this crowd. There's too many sauces. We thought of it this way. She works for an advertising agency. She works at Dixon Schwabel. At the time, obviously, I worked in radio, and I was tasked often with writing commercials. And one of the sort of creative writing 101 when it comes to writing commercials is don't sell the thing, sell the emotion you're going to feel while you're using the thing. So don't sell the car, don't sell the plastic or the aluminum panels, the wheels, the tires, the steering wheel, the radio. Don't sell the stuff. Sell the emotion of driving down the road with the windows open in the middle of summer in a brand new car. Yeah. Sell the emotion, not the thing. And everybody on that shelf was selling the thing. Everybody on the shelf was selling cheap or gourmet. Those were the only two messages. It was either 99 cents for this bottle of sauce. Hey, look, 5 for 5. Oh, are you kidding me? 99 cents. Or $8.99 gourmet, yep. Chef so-and-so, best sauce you'll ever have in your life. Nobody was just saying, you know what? We're not cheap. We're not gourmet. Emotion. We are your grandfather's house on a Sunday afternoon. So we said maybe there's room here for an extra play. And that was really the impotence was that. It was that light bulb moment of everyone here is being a little too salesy. Let's not be salesy. Let's just play the emotion. So the actual branding, I went to, because of Ryan and her job at Dixon Schwabel, I had access to their graphic designer. Lauren Dixon and Mike Schwabel gave him their blessing.
Yeah.
His name is Marshall Statt, to work freelance to create our label. And I went to him and I said, I want it to be, I think my original description was something like, I want it to be like a children's book. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking Grandpa and Paul, but Paul's got to be a little kid because Paul was cute when he was a little kid, not so much in his 30s. Let's do Grandpa and Paul picking tomatoes, but it looks like a children's book. Yeah. And he came back and he said, okay. And he gave me a rendition of what looks a lot like our label today. But then he also gave me the second thing where he said, or you could go for the more hip, trendy look. And he also sent me this thing that had very sharp graphics, and it called itself Rock and Roma, right? Mm-hmm. ROC for Rochester. Yep. Roma because we use Roma tomatoes. Yep. Rock and Roma sauce. And it was very sharp and hip and trendy. And for a brief moment, I considered that, thinking, but it just wasn't genuine, and it wasn't emotional. So we went on family vacation in July of 2014. This is just about a month before we launch our business. It is go time. I mean, I need to get these labels printed right now because this business is launching like next month. And just did a family vote, and it was just unanimous. It was like, no, you got to go with children's book, the animation. That's the cute look, not this Rock and Roma thing. This is emotion is the way to go with this. And so we did, and thank God we did, because I hear that a lot, Chris. I hear a lot of people who say, hey, the label really stood out to me. Yep.
It's excellent. And what I love about kind of how you share that is it speaks to the importance of the authenticity of the product, that it's something that drew you in emotionally. It tells a story. I think it's great. And there's a bunch of different renditions based on the different sauces. Really great job.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm really proud of our branding. I'll tell you the truth. Companies they rebrand. They look at their logos. I've in 7 years. It's granted it's only been 7 years, but in 7 years I've never even considered changing our branding. Yeah. I think it's spot on. Yep.
So I'm going through that right now. We are in the midst of changing our family winery name and moving it to kind of an eponymous designation, calling it Mystic Cellars. And it was in part because we had bought a winery that existed, and we kept the name. No one in our family is Italian, so I didn't have any family heritage to stand on. And, having kids changes your perspective on where you want that business to be in a generation or two or three.
Yeah.
And so it was about building a family legacy. So I'm in the midst of where you were years ago, trying to refashion everything to really just say, this is us, this is me, this is what we're trying to do, and this is what we make. This is our life's work.
Have you landed on anything yet? I mean, are you there, or are you still truly in the brainstorm
No,
session?
so
Or like, where are you?
we've got a new logo. We'll be announcing
great.
it very, very shortly. So
Awesome.
yeah, we're excited about it.
Awesome, man. Congrats.
So kind of final thing, and then we'll let you go. You also do co-packing, not just for, you make your sauce, but you help build other brands as well. And what I think is really cool is people who have an idea and a recipe can start really small. I think like as few as 20 cases, and they can grow with you. I'd love to hear about some of the brands or products, ideas people come to you with, and dreams you've helped kind of come to fruition.
I love doing that so much. I love when somebody is in here and it's new to them, because I hear from a couple different types of client, and some clients are well established. They've already got plenty of volume and they're looking for a co-packer, and that's great for business. I mean, sure, of course, those are conversations that I like having, but there's still something so special about that person who doesn't know anything about this business. They just know they've got this recipe and they want to do it because their mother or their grandmother showed them how to do it. And I love the opportunity to sit with people and help them bring that to life, to walk them through the steps, to hold their hand through the steps. I just love that. I love just being CC'd on the emails as things like nutrition panels are being created and barcodes are being assigned. Like, I just love that stuff, because I remember the feeling the first time I got a barcode, I took a picture of myself with the computer screen, with the barcode on the computer screen, like, look at me, I got a barcode, like, so I know how exciting that can be, because you get a barcode and you're like, oh my God, I'm official now. I can be scanned, and I love that. What it is the first time I ever felt that, it was so exciting to me that now when I see other people feel it for the first time, I get a little bit of that back, where I get to feel it again for the first time when someone's excited. Or just imagine just the idea of seeing a nutrition panel for one of the recipes that you created. I mean, like, where are you ever going to get that?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I get to email it to the people and be like, look, here's what we came up with.
Yeah.
And I will say that can sometimes be funny, because sometimes people are kind of shocked at the sodium, like, in their products, So there are times where that, sometimes, I mean, I'm getting off track, but there are some times where that can get a little, like, almost controversial, where people are like, wait a
I
minute,
had no idea.
what are you talking about? Sugar. And I'm like, yeah, you remember when we added all that sugar? Like, you got to disclose that, man. So, like, sometimes it goes in that direction, but it's funny, it's fun. And I love that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you're making dreams come true, Paul. You're living your dream.
Thanks.
I want to thank you for being on the show. Any final word?
Dude, thank you so much for having me, but we missed one huge thing. You deciding to not be a lawyer anymore.
Yeah.
Have you talked in length about that?
At times, generally just in the tasting room.
All right.
I'd be happy to share that. So
give me there's two moments that I'm dying to know about. Is the light bulb moment where you said, I really probably should, and then the moment where you actually did.
Yeah.
Right? Because probably there was some time in between the two.
There was. My love of wine came about right around when I was 21 years old. I was living in Sacramento, going to college, and I went out to Napa, and just that sort of tasting wine, being outside, seeing the agriculture around, being with friends, like, that was the moment that told me I really wanted to learn more about wine. I didn't think about anything with regard to the industry at that point. A couple years later, I end up as an Army reservist. I'm deployed, and I come home from deployment, and I had it good. I'm not saying I had PTSD or anything, but anytime anyone's deployed, you come back and you feel disconnected. And so you work through things. There's this concept called biophilia where to help you connect, oftentimes the best thing to do is to start growing things. So I found myself around 2005, 2006, just becoming addicted to growing things. Huge backyard garden. And that coincided with, hey, I have all of these credit card points. I cashed them in and got an Amazon gift card and got a home winemaking kit. So I'm doing this in my spare time while I'm in law school, because when I had come back from deployment, I went to law school and I was on track to be a lawyer. So I discovered my passion a little bit later in the midst of pursuing what I thought I had always wanted to do, which was, become an attorney. So I graduate from law school, I pass the bar, I start practicing. And although I worked with amazing people, they're still mentors and people I consider salt of the earth. It was a grind. This was 2009. I went into law to become a bankruptcy lawyer because my family had been through bankruptcy when I was young, and I'd seen the hardship that caused, but how important that was. So I had always figured, I'll just go and I'll become a bankruptcy lawyer and I'll help people in financial distress. So it turned out that I ended up becoming a creditor's attorney. I had a great job offer and I took it. So I was working for the banks in the middle of the financial crisis. And though it wasn't consumer credit, these were businesses that were failing. We were in Chapter 11 cases. I just felt like I wasn't watching people get a fresh start. I was watching dreams collapse. So that period, the financial crisis, is one of the biggest things that changed my entire outlook on life. And so I actually, at that point, said, I can't do this the rest of my life. And that coincided with my mom, who's from Rochester, reading the Democrat and Chronicle and seeing that there was a winery for sale. So one other little piece of that story, when I was in law school and met my wife in France, we decided to get married in Rochester because that's where most of my family was. And we had a house here where we would come on vacation. And we figured it was halfway between California and France. So we get married in Rochester. The day after the wedding, we tour the Finger Lakes. I fall in love with it. So that seed is planted. I'm practicing. I'm really a lot of hours. At times, this isn't against anyone I was working with. It felt soul sucking though, kind of that practice. And I just reached a point where when my mom called me one day, this was in 2011, I was about to go into court. I was literally in a parking garage. She says, hey, you remember that winery, that last one we visited? It's for sale. What do you think if we do a family project? And I was just like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And, prior to that, my wife and I had talked about some small projects in California, maybe doing a custom crush. So sort of the co-pack of the wine industry, starting a label. But I also didn't really want to be in California anymore. I wanted to go somewhere that felt like you could be a pioneer, frontier. And the Finger Lakes, I'm not a pioneer. There are plenty of people who paved that way, but we're still at this point where the potential is enormous. We're still at a point where a lot of people don't know about the region yet. And so you get to evangelize and you get to build and you get to, be part of that generation that took a lot of the work that has been laid and really expand on that. So all of these feelings, this sense of building, this sense of uniqueness, this sense of place, working in agriculture, a new start. It was not the financially best decision for me to make. I would have done better continuing to practice law. But it is what I wanted to do with my life. So that's what led me here. It's been a long and winding road.
You are so well spoken. Man, you tell a good story and you're well spoken. I don't know how you can listen to the two of us talk and think I'm the one who had the media career, because I feel like I stumble and can't tell a cohesive story and listen to you, man.
You're a heck of a lot funnier than I am.
Do you ever deal with imposter syndrome though? Being that you were a lawyer forever. Now you own a winery. Do you ever deal with imposter syndrome? Because I would feel that occasionally. And then I listen to tons of entrepreneur podcasts, and it comes up a ton with other entrepreneurs where they talk about feeling imposter syndrome. And when they describe it, I go, oh my God, I get that sometimes. Now, I'll be honest with you. I get it sometimes. And then there's other times where I'm very proud and I feel as though the credit is deserved, right? We have worked hard. We have learned a lot. We are doing things the right way. Then there's other times where I'm like, I should tell them all. At some point, I have to tell them I'm a fraud. And I'll tell my wife that. She'll be like, what have you done that's fraudulent? And I'm like, well, they think that I know how to do this. And she'll be like, well, but where's the fraud? Like, are you not doing it? Is someone else doing it? And I'm like, no, I'm doing it, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. Like, well, it seems like it's been 7 years. It seems like maybe you're doing it right. You're not a fraud, And then I have to go like, no, she's right. I think actually I'm not actually fraudulent. You know what I mean? Like that happens.
So I'll tell you, Paul, I have lived with that in every phase of my careers. Whether it was as a soldier, whether it was as a lawyer, whether it was when I was just managing the winery, all the way to being the winemaker. I think that it can be dangerous, right? Because you can go down these rabbit holes of feeling inadequate. But I try and harness it to say, you know what? All it means is I don't know everything. So I need to keep working harder and harder and harder. And I don't know if you or I will ever shake it, because I think it's part of what spurs us on and drives us. And you know what it's done for me? I was worried about it, and I realized one of the more technical styles of wine you can make is sparkling wine. And so I make a lot of sparkling wine. The first and foremost reason why I do it is because I love sharing it, enjoying it. But it also is a way for, and I didn't realize this at the time. I realized it much later. It was a way for me to say, you know what? I'm not a fraud. I'm not an imposter. I'm kind of doing something really cool and really technical. It takes some skill, and it also takes a lot of physical hard work. I don't know if we'll ever shake it. I don't know if it'd be good if we did.
No, it wouldn't. And you know where it manifests itself in a good way is humility, what you just said. It's always learning. I think you and I are not afraid to say why or how. I don't understand. Can you explain that to me? Whereas I think, we've been around some people who have maybe the opposite of imposter syndrome. And they kind of will not ever admit that they don't know how or they don't know why. So they will just stay ignorant to those things because they're never going to tell you they don't know how to do that. They're just going to pretend they know how to do it. Whereas I really have just never had any shyness towards calling somebody and going, hey, how do I do this? And how do I do that? And, that's what we were talking about Cornell earlier. That's one of those things where I'm not just going to put out an unsafe product. I'm going to call and get the answer to that. But now I know the answer to that. And I feel fraudulent because I didn't create the answer to that. I asked someone else. And my wife will say to me, well, how do you think everyone else learns? They ask,
Exactly.
Like we put out this sauce and I told my wife, I go, well, I'm having the imposter syndrome thing happening. And it was this, we just did a collaboration with Pittsford Dairy and Living Roots Winery. And I told my wife, I go, well, I just feel fraudulent over this. I just, and she'll say, well, whose recipe did you steal? And I go, well, no, I didn't steal anyone's recipe. I just made it up, but I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. She'll be like, well, that still counts. Like if you made up that recipe and you put it into the public and people are buying it and saying they like it, that's called creating a recipe. You did the thing that you're afraid you didn't do. And I just have such a hard time understanding that. I think that I probably sound crazy to people. I don't think
so, because the very first, you mentioned Living Roots Winery, and the first thing that comes to mind is they're real winemakers, right? Like family heritage goes back to Australia, hugely successful companies, building a really cool project in Rochester. Like, man, they really know what they're doing. I'm just sort of fumbling along here. So, yeah, it is there. It's a struggle, but
yeah. No, it's just interesting. I love talking to people about that, especially when I get the opportunity like this to talk to somebody like you, to another business owner, and just to hear that it exists with others. That thing. Do you get to do do you do legal work for other wineries? Like, do you get to put the lawyer muscle to work?
So
still?
I have in the past,
Yeah.
when I kind of one other additional little story. I loved Rochester so much that even before I had planned on coming back here and coming into the wine industry, I took the New York bar. So I was licensed. I've been licensed in New York for well over a decade, and especially when we first moved back, I was doing more legal work. Not huge things, but whether it's advising on grape contracts, whether it's real estate transactions, even helping folks with like cell tower leases. Uh, I would like to do more of that. I just found myself in the last probably 3-4 years not being able to dedicate the amount of time to clients that I knew that I would need to.
Yeah.
But as the business continues and grows, it's definitely something I would like to do, because it's that combination of not just knowing the law, but knowing it as a winemaker that is pretty unique.
Right. It seems to me very marketable to a niche group of people. You can basically go winery to winery in the Finger Lakes and be like, hey guys, I'm like you in the sense that I'm a winemaker, but I'm also a lawyer, and you're probably paying a lot of money to lawyers who have to spend a lot of time looking up the things that you're asking them, whereas I'm living this every single day. It seems marketable to me to play that. And granted, of course, you're trying to spend your time growing a wine brand. So like, you're like, look, I don't have all the time in the world to go be a lawyer right now, but it does seem to me like there's something there, you know? I mean,
and
you did all that studying, like, let's make some money off it.
that is true. Actually, speaking of having the chance to talk with other business folks, I totally forgot to mention your wonderful podcast. So people can check that out as well,
Well,
where you
I don't know.
you have a great survey of whether they're people who are co-packing with you or just other business leaders, specifically in the Rochester area. So people need to check out the Paul Guglielmo show.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's going okay. I feel like I could put more work into it. I think one thing I said to myself pretty early on was I don't want it to feel like work. I just want it to feel easy, because I did do radio for so long. I like doing it. I like this. I like sitting at look, you've been trying to get rid of me for 20 minutes, and I'm like, let's keep talking. And I do like doing this, and I do the podcast, but I used to think man, I could really work hard at this and really go and get exclusive news-making interviews. But then I went, you know what? I'd rather just sit back and talk to people about stuff I like talking about. So I think it's going fine. It seems to get a decent amount of listens, and we get some good storytelling on there too. So thank you for the plug. I appreciate
Definitely. I imagine, because just like kind of talking about my legal career, I do get that itch sometimes, and I want to scratch it in terms of getting my hands on some legal work. This has to be a great way for you, though, to have a podcast, have been in radio. You don't have to face all of the fears, the same grind, but you get to exercise that talent that you developed for so long.
It is, because I will admit, the one thing that I like is that we could probably just keep going, and I'm never going to let this go to dead air ever. I'm proud of that. I am actually proud of the fact that I can do that, because not every people to this day that are on the radio can't do that. And I actually am proud of the fact that I got to the point where I'm going, how much time do you need to fill? We'll fill it. I'm not going to say it's all going to be good. Some of it, I mean, there's definitely going to be some yawning, I think, at some point or another, but we can do this. One of my most favorite accomplishments in radio, you mentioned earlier Bob Lonsberry. And I will say one thing. Bob did not think this was a great idea, but it was for the right reason. Bob actually was somebody who used to tell me off the air and behind the scenes that he thought that I had a very bright future in radio. And I think to him, I'm so worried to this day that I disappointed Bob, because I think to him, when he heard I was leaving, he was like, oh, but you were going to take over for me one day.
Yeah.
Like, that was kind of how I think he might have felt. I'm putting words in his mouth, so maybe he's like, shut up, Paulie. But that's where he was coming from. But I remember this one day, I was at the Y in Pittsburgh. This is not that long ago, honestly, just a couple years ago. And I was driving to work, and it was like 7:44. And he goes on the air at 8:05, and I got the call saying, Lonsberry's snowed in. He can't be here. Can you be on the air at 8:05? And I'm looking, and I'm going, well, yeah, I'm going to be there in 10 minutes. I can do it. So I basically sat down and did Lonsberry's show for 4 hours with zero prep. And I'm not going to say that was an award-winning show, but just the fact that I was able to do it I was so proud of that, man. I still hang my head on that day.
It sounds strange, Paul, but I think I remember that because you were saying, hey, I found out 15 minutes ago I'm going to be doing the show. And driving up from Mount Morris would be quite a commute if you snowed in. And this was right before COVID, so people weren't really prepped to get right on the air like that.
No, it was people would do. Typically, if I was going to do a 4-hour show, I would probably spend 2 hours doing prep. I mean, I would spend half the time I was going to be on the air, I would spend doing prep, honestly. And when you say a 4-hour show, remember we're talking radio, so it's really more like 3 hours once you take out all the commercials and news and traffic and all that stuff. So I would do 2 hours of prep just to do 3 hours of talking.
And I was impressed because it didn't just turn into open lines, which is the easy go-to.
No, it wasn't just open mic Friday. No, I sat there and I just told a few stories. I would always keep like a little note in my phone of stories I had for the radio, just because not because I was worried about running out of things to say, but just because I would forget them. I would just forget these stories, and I just remember going in that day and being like, all right, and I would grab my phone and I opened up the notes and I just said, let's do a radio show, Then I brought up like 13wham.com and I was like, let's see what the headlines are. Let's give some blind opinions on these things. And then like one of the tricks of radio also is if you just give like an opinion on something, you're gonna strike, especially a news item, you're gonna strike chords because people are either gonna be like yes or they're gonna be like no.
Well, and what I always found fascinating, I think it speaks to both your characters. What we all need to do is rise above some of the political disagreements we have. But Bob's been a good friend to me. But you guys have very different political opinions. So I imagine that would have been a really easy way, just knowing his audience, the demographic. You just say something off the wall, you're going to get a ton of calls, and you've got an hour to fill.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I would do that show, and I would get always a handful of calls saying, "Get this guy off the air. His opinions are." Then you'd get a handful of calls of people saying, "Thank God, finally somebody to represent that opinion." And it's fine. It always boils down to 50-50. All those things always boil down to half the people think that thing and half the people think that thing. It always does. And I just think that one of the strategies for radio and how to do that, how to do those really hard, controversial political topics, is to stay within the 40-yard lines of it. Give that a kind of that left opinion, kind of that right opinion. But like if you start going like all the way to the left or all the way to the right, then you come off like a crazy, like you stay within those 40s or the 30s and maybe tiptoe to the 25, but you don't go much further than that. Be careful.
You can get yourself in trouble. On this show, this isn't an overtly political show, but we have guests, people will hear these podcasts, and it ranges so that it will be. And it's more, I don't talk specific, it's not red versus blue, it's philosophy. And it is about exposing people to different ideas where we have forgotten how to do that. We have forgotten how to talk to each other and recognize, going back to what you were talking about, living in Italy, that we are all people, that, just because we have a different idea doesn't mean we should be abandoned or thrown off, the block. And we've got to be able to get along.
Did you ever go to the doctor when you were in France? Did you ever have to do that?
I did. I have one funny story about that, not for me, but invariably when I was in France, I would end up with some kind of sinus infection or some sort of stomach bug. So, what?
I went to the doctor in Italy once, and my parents wired me like $700 because they were like, "Well, we don't know what this is going to be like." And I just remember the guy like looked me over, told me that I had whatever I had, and handed me a bottle of stuff, and he's like, "That'll be $11." And then I called my parents, and I was like, "You got it right. It was $700. That's great. I can't believe how you guys knew that exact dollar amount."
That's great. Yeah, no, same thing, $25 or whatever it was. The craziest kind of medical story is really a lost in translation story. So my first year of law school that summer studying in France, one of my friends, and it's towards the end of kind of that short semester, gets really sick. So they take her to the doctor. The doctor sends her to the hospital. They check her in. All of us are saying, oh my gosh, what's going on? They have her in isolation for this short period of time, whatever. Eventually, we hear that the doctors have told her that she has smallpox. And
Oh my
she's
God.
scared to death. Where do you even get smallpox these days? It's France. I mean, this isn't, kind of backwoods somewhere. And it turns out that they were just taking some precautions. She actually had the chicken pox, but they didn't know how to translate it right. She had never had the chicken
they
pox.
were literal small little
So
pox.
they told her she had smallpox. And we were like, I mean, that was intense. Everyone was like, we were around her. I had been deployed already. So I was like, I had my smallpox vaccine. I was one of the only ones. But yeah.
Oh my God, that is so funny, right? They were trying to describe like there's these tiny little pox that you have on your body. There's like small pox. I can totally see that happen. Where I lived was also backwoods. It was very rural. The hospital was like 2 hours away, and the pharmacy and the doctors were open during the day. And so I remember one time having it occur to me, like, what if I got sick at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday? And I asked like my host mother, and she's like, don't do that. Don't get sick at 3. And I'm going, what do you mean don't do that?
My wife is from a small town outside of Toulouse, and Sundays there is nothing open, absolutely nothing.
No.
And Saturday, same thing. It was kind of shorter days, so there is that sort of American on-demand, like imminent fear of, oh my gosh, what if I need a Gatorade because I was sweating during that hike?
Totally, yeah. What if I'm hungry on a Saturday night at 10 o'clock? And their answer is just kind of like, don't be hungry. You should have eaten dinner.
So that's why there's cured meat. It stays good forever.
Yeah. They'll just be like, they'll be like, maybe there's leftovers or something. But right, like that idea of I'm gonna drive to the 7-Eleven and get some chips or something, like not happening in this town that I lived in. No. Anyway, all right. Well, hey, listen, I'm sorry.
No.
I know I dragged you a half hour longer than you wanted to go.
That's fine. The show goes with the flow. So, and if people don't want to listen, they can tune out.
That's true, and as in my experience, they will. But then they will email you later to let you know they tuned out, so they didn't hear the thing that they then tell you they didn't like when you talked about. So that was one of my favorite. That's another radio thing is I never listen to your show. I absolutely hate your show. A good example would be yesterday when you were talking about this. That was a total thing that would happen in the radio all the time.
Well, the important thing is, did they hear the advertisers or not? So
Right.
I can't tell you how good it's been to sit down with you, Paul. You're really doing a great job growing this business. It's exciting to see how you're able to facilitate other folks' dreams come true. I'm looking forward to using it in our kitchen at the winery, and when I'm a little lazy, at home as well, because we tend to make our own sauces.
Thank you. Our pizza sauce, you mentioned the flatbread pizza sauce has butter and honey in it. So that's where, a lot of people will say like, oh, this has such a good flavor to it's butter and honey. Most pizza sauces just have sugar and oregano, right? It's like thick, like the standard American pizza sauce is like thick tomato, sugar, oregano. We're thick tomato, butter, honey, and oregano. But the butter and the honey instead of the sugar is like the thing that makes it.
So
awesome.
that is one of my kind of secret sauces. Honey on pizza is one of the best things ever. Something I discovered in France.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Yeah. Chris, thanks for having me, dude. This was really cool.
Definitely.
You're a pro. You sound good. You've got a whole setup. Like this is very professional. This is great.
Well, we need to just do a segment where you can tell me how great I am, and I can get rid of the imposter syndrome.
Well, let's come out. We don't have to record it, but let me come out and drink some wine. That'd be awesome.
Good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We've had the chance to talk with Paul Guglielmo, who has a storied career in Rochester radio and is writing a new chapter in his book. Gugliamo sauce and co-packing. It's a great product. Pick it up. And now you know the story behind it. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this show. This has been Viticulture, where we share ways to cultivate a good life. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com. Subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again for stopping by.